Hi, this is Mark Burgess, and you're listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am your on-again, off-again host, Jay Hrcsko. Joined with me tonight, I have Andrew Leff.
Howdy.
Troy Lightfoot.
That's your cue, Troy.
I think he probably went up to go get a steak or something to match his keto diet. That's what I'm assuming.
Wait, I'm back. Sorry, my wife just got home. So.
All right, so Troy's with us, and we have a returning special guest straight out of Colorado, a good friend of mine, Lynn Winterboer. Lynn, thanks for joining.
Hi, it's really good to be back, and it's in a much quieter environment. My last time I spoke with y'all was at Mile High Agile, I think last year, and it was very noisy but very exciting.
Fantastic. So Lynn, everybody's familiar with me. They're familiar with Andrew. They're familiar with Troy. So real quickly, why don't you just give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Okay, I'd love to do that. So I have been an Agile and a data geek since the last century. I should have a t-shirt that says that. I am currently a Scrum Master for our solutions team at the company that I work for, one of our many solutions teams. But I'm also an Agile coach for the 4 release trains that are in our solution train. So I sort of split my time. It's not ideal to be splitting your time like this, but I actually am so grateful to be getting up every day and doing things that I love, even if I can't get to all of them every day.
Fantastic.
And prior to becoming an employee of this company, I spent 10 years running my own company, a small business that provided coaching and training to Agile data teams. So we focused on bringing the Agile principles and practices to data-focused teams. And it's just a blend of the 2 nerdy things that I love the most in the world.
Great for you. Great for you.
Yeah, and the teams I work with now are heavily data focused as well.
So that's right in your sweet spot. Well, Lynn, once again, thank you for joining us again. And the topic
thank you for having me.
Of our episode this morning, what have you, is we're doing another episode of Should I Take This? And the course we're going to discuss in this show is the Safe Release Train Engineer course. So Andrew and Troy are both SPCs, if I believe so. So I'm going to throw it to you, Drew. For those of our users that don't speak fluent SAFe, can you explain what a release train engineer is?
Uh-oh.
This is wonderful audio. I think I'm going to leave all this in. This is
Sorry. Sorry. I ran to the bathroom. I had to pee. We can edit that out, but or leave it in. It's fine. Hey, Troy, see how you take a break? You just take it.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, Jay, the role of the RTE is really, to me, the kind of the eyes, the ears, the barometer, the health check, the sanity, the coach, the therapist, the emotional support animal when it comes to the overall train that they're leading. So it's the Uber Scrum Master for the entire train. And they're really there as a servant leader for the train as well as to the organization. And to me, it's one of the hardest roles to occupy. And it's kind of thankless to me. If I had to sum it up or bottom line it, the RTE is the junk drawer, right? Everything goes into the junk drawer, and the RTE has to be able to do everything. Unfortunately, that's usually been my experience.
Now, Troy, would you concur with Leff's assessment?
I never thought about it as a junk drawer, but that's an interesting, I don't know if I totally agree, but I understand where he's coming from. I would say, I look at it as kind of an Uber Scrum Master, kind of someone who's a Scrum Master of many teams in a way, who has to coordinate and facilitate a lot of different potential issues, anything from teams not collaborating effectively or communicating to upholding any kind of real process to be effective, as well as someone who can be a systems thinker and actually try to drive change from a systems point of view instead of, a lot of times as a scrum master, scrum masters, they work with their team and they try to kind of optimize their performance of their team. So an RTE to me is someone who does that with a team of teams. And the only way you can do that is to use some kind of systems thinking. And so that's how I think about it. It's more of a systems view of the Agile teams.
Okay. So the reason why we're doing this episode and the reason why this came up is Lynn and I actually just took this course together. I did try to get our instructor. Unfortunately, she had a conflict and couldn't make it. So Lynn, let me ask you, going into this course, how familiar were you with the role itself?
Okay, that's a good question. So I would say I was pretty self-educated on it in that as a coach who's supporting RTEs, I needed to know what I was talking about. So I spent a lot of time on the SAFE website. I am very visual and I love that big picture and being able to click in and read articles. And the only thing about that site is it can be completely overwhelming too, because you're never done clicking links. And so you just keep going and going. But I also have recently really enjoyed reading M. Campbell Pretty's book on the art of avoiding a train wreck, which also gave me an additional perspective on the RTE role. I would say watching these 4 RTEs that I work with over the last 18 months has helped inform the role in practice, whether it's as designed or not. It was something I wanted to learn about in the class. And I've taken advantage of our organization. Really is awesome about offering a lot of different training. And anytime I could get into one of the Scaled Agile classes, I took it just on principle that I'm a coach within a SAFE organization. I should know this stuff really, really well. And just because, my prior clients that used it a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way to use it. So I wanted to become really well educated in from a foundational point of view. So I've taken a lot of the other SAFE classes, which then of course gives me a little bit of reference on the RTE role. But I'd never been in the role myself officially.
That makes 2 of us. So before I go into my rationale for taking the course, I want to publicly shame Chris Merman in regards to M and her book. I have been after Merman for a while to line up M so we can have her on the show to discuss the book, and he hasn't. So M, if you're listening, Chris Merman is the bad guy. Merman, if you're listening, good on you, buddy. It's your fault. So I honestly was not familiar with the role of an RTE whatsoever. And our facilitator, one of the first things she does in our course is she puts up this giant whiteboard and has everybody write a question on a Post-it. And the Post-its all go on a whiteboard. And then she, at the end of the class, to start the class, she reads off all the questions. And at the end of the class, she reads off the questions to see if they were answered. And I put up a Post-it that said, WTF does an RTE do? And everybody in the class obviously laughed. But the places that I've worked that were SAFE shops, and multiple, they always seem to use the release train engineer as almost like a quasi-project manager. And they seem to spend a lot of time doing air traffic controlling and status readouts and percent complete of features in the PI and a lot of volumetric heavy stuff. And when we get next question and the next part of this show, where we start going into the actual course itself, that's not the role at all. But like you, Lynn, the opportunity was there to take the course. I do try to take the courses whenever they're available because I just want to learn more, and I found it very, very fascinating. So now let's switch over to what we actually learned in the course. And I'm going to throw it over to, I'm going to start with you, Troy. So what did you take out of the course materials? Because I know you're an SPC, you can train it, but when you retaught this course, and I know you did a podcast episode previously with a couple of RTEs, what was the big thing that you took out of the coursework in relation to the role itself?
That the role is a coach of, it's partly coach and it's partly facilitator and it's partly doer. It's like everything, right? And the your skills coming into it. For example, if someone was like a project manager or a program manager, there are skills that are definitely that could translate to that. But it's not everything necessarily. I don't think there's a one-to-one translation from a previous role to it, if that makes sense. Similar to a Scrum Master, actually, I would say. So that's my takeaway, is that while it does take skills from maybe a previous role that somebody might have had, there's a whole bunch of skills that they might have to learn and kind of go down the rabbit hole.
What do you think, Drew?
Yeah, no, I would agree with what Troy's saying. I think the class is a challenge, right? And I think it's like with any of the certifications, and we've talked about this quite a bit in the sense of it's a way to get an entry point, but it shouldn't be the starting point. I've worked with a lot of RTEs in the past that it took the class without a lot of Scrum Master background. And I think it's really hard, just like an organization that decides to scale before they even have any Agile footprint or Scrum practice at all, or any Agile practice for that matter. It's really hard just to jump into that role without having some background or some context as far as, you might be a Scrum Master for one team, but now you're taking on a train, right, of up to 125 people. So that's a lot of teams. That's a lot of drama. That's a lot of therapy. That's a lot of coaching. So I think it doesn't quite prepare you for that level of scale when it amplifies all those things. I mean, people are people. So it makes it very difficult if you're not equipped to really kind of not be a problem solver for everybody, but really enable and build the capabilities within the train for people to solve their own problems and not just tell them, hey, just self-organize. Well, that doesn't work either, right? That's just controlled chaos.
I know Leff is traditionally into weightlifting, if I remember correctly. Imagine like you've never lifted weights before and no one's ever taught you proper form. And all of a sudden you're expected to grow 10 pounds of muscle in a few months. Like it's very, very unrealistic to expect anybody to come into a position like that and be successful right away. When I say what you just said, Leff, was where you're going to scale Agile without having any kind of a semblance of team level Agile going in the first place. That's the metaphor I'm trying to make, and maybe it's a good one or a bad one, I don't know. But the point is that it's something that is very, very difficult, and you're likely going to have to learn a lot along the way. And I look at that kind of work as just a very early starting point to get to agility. And one of the things I think a lot of companies miss out on is, and you can feel free to agree or disagree with me, it's fine, is that they want to scale something, but they don't even really know what they're scaling. So they put all this structure in place, but the things that they're trying to scale don't exist. And when they do exist, it's not what it's supposed to be. So therefore, trying to scale it just creates more problems. So an RTE put into that position is really going to have a very steep learning curve, because not only do you have to learn the job, and you have to learn about, let's say you've never been part of an Agile team before, or a Scrum Master, then you're going to have to learn what the Scrum Masters do, because you have to help coach them. Then you're going to have to learn about all this process on top of the safe process. And then on top of that, deal with a bunch of change management for people that might not even want to do it. So
yeah,
it is really, really a difficult a job, and it takes a certain personality and skill sets to be able to do it.
Troy, you just made me, I'm going to let you go, Leff, and then I want to go to Lynn. Troy, you just made me think of one of my favorite one-liners of yours, where you said, if you try and scale garbage, you end up at the landfill.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
It is. I'm totally using that. And just to put an exclamation point on it, I think to further complicate it, it's, hey, we're going safe. Hey, project manager, or, analyst, or whatever, insert title here, you're now an RTE, right? So not having the process to interview people, to truly set expectations as far as what you're even asking them to do, sending them to training for RTE training after they've just been appointed an RTE, it just, again, further complicates the conversation and the actual enablement of someone to be successful, in my opinion.
Well, and I like to, I've been watching a couple different scenarios play out in my world. And one of them is, well, and I don't actually have a specific RTE in mind, but if an RTE is, if somebody is, like, you've been a really good program manager and now you're asked to play this RTE role, without the training, it's such an important role. And what if that role then gets the ball rolling in the wrong direction, or sort of, they read the stuff on the SAFE website and they immediately translate everything into their traditional program management framework that's in their mind. Like, because that's what we do as humans, is we connect this new idea to a known idea. And so then they are like, oh, this is just what I used to do. We just call it different things. And then, you know, we've all had that, we've all been part of that problem where somebody who's in a position of leadership in an Agile team is still leading from a very waterfall mindset, but they don't have any, if we haven't sent them to training, then they don't have any opportunity to know how to do it differently. But the flip side is, if you have a bunch of people in RTE training who are going to start that job, but they don't know really what the job is, they don't really know what the hands-on day-to-day challenges of the job are, then they're going to struggle that way as well. And it's been occurring to me for a company like ours that can offer the training, I guess multiple times, I would sort of assume, is that it might make sense to say, hey, we're going to have a class for people who are brand new to the RTE role, and this is going to teach you what your new role is. And then you're going to come back in 6 months to a year and have a class, another of that, maybe even that same cohort, that says, now that you've been in it, let's go back and revisit these concepts. Because I think that would be the best way to help set people up for success.
That is a great idea, Lynn. I'm actually going to I'm going to steal it and give you the hat tip and suggest that up the flagpole, because I think for me, the thing that I took out of this course, or the thing that surprised me the most, it is, and again, my perception is skewed because of my past experiences, this job is basically a program level coach. An RTE is a program level coach, right? You know, we've all, Leff and I and Troy, we've all had these arguments and these long-winded podcast rants about, you know, the stratification in coaching. That's what an RTE job is. If you look at the 80-20, it's 80% coaching and 20% just orchestration, right? Air traffic controlling. Whereas I learned most of the places I've seen it, it's 80% project management, orchestration, air traffic controlling, and maybe 20% coaching. And that was a huge eye opener to me. And Lynn, I think you would agree, there were a lot of people in our course who were even shaking their heads saying, I have this job and you're telling me how to do this job, and it is completely incongruent with the expectations made of me for this job. Yeah, there was a wide variety. We had people who'd been in the RTE role for a while and had, frankly, really followed the SAFE patterns and used the SAFE tools and techniques pretty consistently and were really comfortable with the role. And other people who had the title and had probably gone out and looked at the website a little bit, but found it overwhelming, and then just made up based on what their boss's expectation was of them, what they should be doing. And they, you know, the idea when we got to the point in the class where we were talking about coaching, like true coaching skills, there was a gal sitting at my table who was she's just shaking her head, and she's like, I would never be welcome into that, right? That's not something I'm invited into, and nor do I have the skills for it. But then other times where we were talking about something maybe more tactical and how you juggle a whole bunch of things, and she was like, hey, I'm really good at that. I'm really good at juggling all these priorities, and here's some techniques I use. So it seemed like everybody in the class definitely had something to learn from the class and had something to contribute. And that was a big reason why I wanted to go, is because two of the 4 RTEs that I work with have already taken the class, and the other 2 were in this class. And it was really, really neat to be in that class with them. And it gives us a reference point now where one of them can call me and say, hey, I want help. You know, can we talk through this? Let's figure out how I'm going to do this for the first time. And we've got that context and we've got that reference point from the class. That's really lovely for us to be able to work together that way. And so next question, and I'm going to stay with you, Lynn, because then I'm going to switch it over to Troy and Drew for a different take on it. What did you think of the actual course materials itself? So, I mean, our course was 3 days. It's a lot to cover in 3 days, right?
Yeah.
What do you remember, right? If it didn't take therapy to undo, what do you remember from the course itself? What do you think? What were some of the high points, the low points? What were your just general thoughts on the overall material?
So when I was thinking through this question before we got on, and flipping through the book, and I think I'll say in general, I'm going to give this as an idea for all of the SAFE classes. Scaled Agile does a really good job with their course material. They work really hard at it. It's polished, it's consistent, for the most part. I mean, to put 3 days of class of slides in essence, with a lot of words on them in a book, and have all the slides in essence share the same message, like be consistent. They're all rowing in the same direction. That's a lot of hard work. As I mentioned in my prior life, had a company that provided education, and I know how hard it is to keep all your semantics lined up and to keep all your diagrams using, they do a really good job with that. So it comes across as very professional, which is great. There's a ton of content in the book. Like, it's a useful reference to flip through and be able to go, oh yeah, that's right, and see the visuals. And they do a really good job with images along with the words. One of the things that I've always wanted to see Scaled Agile do is back off of having so many words on every slide. I would love it if they would use the notes layout where they have the slide, which is the image that goes up in the classroom. And it has the visual on it that you want people to be looking at while they're thinking about this. And all those words are at the bottom in the notes. Because what happens in the classroom is you have people, half the people who are visual learners are just reading all the words on the slide and totally ignoring whatever the instructor is saying. The other half, who are audible learners, are just listening to the instructor and not reading what's on the slide. And really, I think the instructor usually expects that people have digested both. And I think there's a lot of content. Now, you guys are SPCs, you can tell me if I've gleaned this correctly, but it seems like there's some content that instructors have to be sure to bring up and speak about in the class that's not specifically written in the book. And if you miss that part, then you're not going to pass that question on the test. And I've only noticed that because when I would, in past SAFE exams, I'll do the practice test and I'll be like, I can't find any reference to this anywhere. And then I'll talk to somebody else and they'll say, oh, no, she said it. Like, during this part, I wrote this down. And I was like, well, I'm a visual learner. I was busy ignoring her so that I could read the slide. So that's my biggest beef about it, is that it's tons of words. It's visually overwhelming when you've got a slide and then you have an instructor talking. It's just a lot. I really much prefer like a very clean slide with an image and a few words that anchors me on the idea, and then I can really listen to what the instructor has to say. But having the notes, the words, the details are still really important to have. And is that the kind of answer you were looking for?
You nailed it. You got it in one, Lynn. You got it in one. So I'll give you my answer. Then I want to ask Troy and Leff what their thoughts are, because they've actually taught the course, right? So for me, and I did the same thing. I went back through my book. I went back through my notes. And again, I would agree that, SAFE keeps all the nomenclature true. They are using the same words over and over again. It is a very dense, not as dense as the LPM course, but it's very dense. I will say, like, the coaching stuff at the end, that's a lot of really tough material, because you really have to slow down. And like you said, you have to read, you have to listen. I will say the Brene Brown video that they linked, to me, it was almost life-changing in that regard, because I'd never seen that speech before. And, we all have a mutual friend who's going through a tough time. And when I thought that video and when I watched the video, and the difference between sympathy and empathy really made me rethink some of the times where I've said, ooh, where I probably should have said, what's in the video, which is like, I can't even imagine what you're going through right now. Right. So I thought that was really interesting. If I had to offer a piece of constructive criticism, I really felt like the DevOps part of the course was just a bolt on, because I've taken that course, and that's typically 3 days of you doing a value stream map and all the DevOps principles. And it was like a real quick value stream exercise, blah, 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 take 10 minutes, whatever. I thought that was very bolted on, almost rushed. And I was, I as someone who's been through the DevOps course and really, really swears by it, I just thought that was a little premature. There was something else. Oh, you know what? The other thing I would love to see SAFE go in on, and here's where Troy's going to start snickering. Their explanation of a cumulative flow diagram is terrible. And
oh my gosh, yes.
They're visual.
It was so painful because there's so many easier and simpler and more tried and true ways to explain it. And I'm going to feel terrible because I probably know whoever it is that created it, and now they're going to tell me that I hurt their feelings by saying this. But really, I was just shaking my head. I was like, ouch, ouch. Why are we doing this?
Yeah,
and everybody was asking questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought the example was not great. And to give our instructor credit, she knows I'm a little bit of a nerd. She actually had me come up and help teach it because the materials aren't great. Even I had a little bit of trouble looking at this CFD, like, okay, well, this is how it kind of sort of works, and ignore these flat spots here because they're unrealistic and whatever. That was my 2 cents. So I'm going to start with you, Troy. So you've taught the course, right, as an instructor. Right. And Lynn had some questions around, is there a notes section that goes along with the slides? What do you think on the preparation of the materials?
I think I think the SAFE trainings are thorough in the sense that they throw pretty much everything in there that they think that you need to discuss for that role. Unfortunately, I think like many trainings, and this is not picking on SAFE by any means, but like many trainings, they're very slide heavy. And not only are they slide heavy, but they're text heavy. I think you guys were talking about that. And when you're trying to do a training and there's like 50 bullets on a slide, and it's just slide after slide, you have people reading what's on there, and then you're trying to talk, and they can't pay attention to either one effectively.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it puts you in a bad spot because you're there to educate. You're there to really help people have those aha moments. And yet you do have a ton of content to go through, which is good. I mean, it's you don't know. I don't think anybody goes to a SAFE class and thinks, oh, I just wasted 2 or 3 days, because it's good content, and there's value to it, and everybody has something to learn from it. But for you as an instructor, I'm actually hesitating getting my SPC because I'm not sure I want to be in that position to have to teach to someone else's content that's so text heavy.
Yeah. So they do provide notes. They do provide a lot of materials to help instructors. So that this is nothing, like I said, there's no sliding in SAFE, but it's just a lot of different trainings are slide heavy. One of the things I do is I try to implement some more how can I teach this without relying on the slides so much? Try to teach certain concepts. So it might be just like whiteboarding. Like I might put the slide up and then just go whiteboard something, to try to get a concept across. And I feel like I should be able to have that kind of leeway, right? So anyway, so that's a little bit about my opinion.
What do you think?
And I think that.
All right, go finish it.
I just want to make one quick comment that I think so. In a corporation like ours, if somebody was going to go to a 3-day training and it wasn't text-heavy slides, most attendees would feel gypped because they're used to getting that course book that's text-heavy. Like they haven't had a different experience, so they don't know. Right? Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand.
Okay.
So it's output over outcomes, what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a wonderful, it's not podcast appropriate anecdote about the first SAFE class I took where the instructor was a vendor coming over from Ireland, and they realized that they never put the customs forms on the boxes of material. So I had to take an Uber to Hog Island, which is outside the Philadelphia International Airport, to sign for this stuff at UPS headquarters. Yeah, it's good times. I didn't get home till like 10 o'clock. Yeah. Leff, what do you think? As someone who's actually had to teach the course, what are your thoughts on the course material?
Yeah, I got to be careful. SAFE pays the bills, right? So I have my positives and negatives. So I think it's very thorough content. Like I'll echo what everyone has said. Where I think some of the challenges is what do you need to have leading up to walking in that class, right? Setting the tone for the class as far as what do you expect? What type of person needs to be involved in this course? So literally the prerequisites leading up to going through an RTE course to me is missing, or it's sort of in that gray area where people just, I don't know, it's just not enough meat in there to walk in the door. I feel like a lot of times if people are walking in the door and this is their first exposure to anything safe or agile related, it's really overwhelming. And teaching, you see it, the emotional field of the entire room shifts from a few people that just feel very lost and intimidated. I think the material can be fairly intimidating as well. So I think, and the instructors, I'll be honest with you, I've had to pair and partner and co-lead with all sorts of varieties, and not everyone is equipped to train. So I think the material becomes a complication if you have somebody that is death by PowerPoint and doesn't have the practical knowledge and application that they've done this work, right? They are just anointed an SPC and they haven't implemented any of it other than textbook. So I think that that's a disservice to the Scaled Agile community. And I would love for Scaled Agile to take a look at their SPCs and evaluate their technical and safe abilities before teaching classes that don't, I mean, I love peppering my class with all the failures I've had in 10 plus years. And I still have people.
Yeah, and people love that.
Yeah.
They find that fascinating. It's what makes it real.
Exactly. And I feel like there's not enough time in those classes to really allow the practice of being an RTE and bringing it back to the classroom to teach others. So I know that we're supposed to self-organize as communities, but it's hard. And I feel that Scaled Agile could do a little bit more for the community as opposed to pumping out certifications in that way. So that's my experience with it. And, you know, I think, like everyone said, the content's there. I just feel like leading up to going through the doors of that class you can be well more prepared, almost like if you were to take a pre-RTE assessment.
Yeah, and actually a pre-RTE assessment, RTE class assessment with feedback on how you did and links to videos and reading material that would help you get the pieces that you're weaker in, you know, kind of get your legs under you. I think that would be great, because I do think, as Jay mentioned, there were people in our class who were all kind of from all angles of the RTE world. And I think some of the people who were brand new to the role or brand new to learning about it in this way, at times felt really kind of lost when the discussion would go into some deep corner that an experienced RTE could participate in that discussion. And the newer RTEs were like, wait, what are we talking about? So I agree with that. I think that's a really good suggestion.
And I think your idea of a prerequisite, I mean, Lynn will tell you, for us to take this course internally, we had a laundry list of internal training that we needed to verify that we had taken or were taking in like the next week due to scheduling, just to get into the class. And it was stuff like epic and feature authoring, you know, user story writing, what is the role of a PO, Agile basics, right? So it's not like, our company did a good job of trying to make sure the right people ended up in the room. And I think the right people did end up in the room. But I think that, to your point, Lynn, and you could see on the looks on some of the people's faces, some people were just overwhelmed, just cerebrally with all the ideas. And I got to give a very public shout out to our instructor. She's great. She's probably the best instructor I've had in all the courses I've taken. I make the running joke that if she taught a Lamaze course, I would take it, because I think she's that good of an instructor. And she did a fantastic job. But I think the gestalt that I got in the room was a lot of people going, hey, this isn't what I currently do in this role. I think I was sold a bad bill of goods. So I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, but Wendy did a really good job of helping the people in the room all understand the vision for what the role could and should be, to help, from a systems thinking point of view, to help the whole system move in the right direction. And I think a lot of people left the class with like a lot of inspiration to say, okay, and I know one of our RTs who'd taken the class a different time, he had not found value in the inspect and adapt, because he read about it. And you know, we have a huge percentage of our workforce is in India. And so we have very precious little overlap time from a time zone standpoint. So for him, the idea of a 4-hour meeting where the people in India have to stay really late there's a cost to that. And so he hadn't really found value in it. But after he took the RTE class, he came and he called me, and this is one of the things that made me want to take the class, because he was so fired up. And he said, we've got to meet the needs of inspect and adapt. And it's in parts. And couldn't we do this in parts? And how could we design a way to do this? It's not a 4-hour meeting, but it's in, and we did. We went and we looked at the intent of the different parts of the meeting, and we came up with a way to do it spread over a little bit of time that was not requiring, and especially now with the global situation with people not being able to be in offices and people being at home, and we can't be asking people to then work late into their days. Not that I think we could have before, but I digress. So what my point there is that I think when somebody takes this class and they get the vision for what the why behind all of the practices that are part of the same SAFE framework, then they can come out and do something with that why. Here's why we do it. How do we meet that need a different way if the thing in the book doesn't really, it's not really feasible for us? How else do we meet that need? And it was pretty cool to see him experiment with that.
That's amazing. Lynn, I know we're coming close on time, so I kind of want to, last 2 questions. First one, it's just for me and you, because we just took the exam. What'd you think of the exam?
I thought it was a really good challenge. It was harder than the SAFE Scrum Master exam and not as hard as the SAFE POPM exam. Felt about the same as the SAFE Agilist. So I've taken all of those in the past year, so I had a comparison point. I took it 10 days after the end of class, and I wish I'd taken it sooner when the experience was more fresh in my mind, because I found myself sort of, scratching the back of my brain for, oh, she said something about that. I felt like the course really prepared us well for it. Although I will say I do, with all of these SAFE classes, I go print out all the recommended reading, like the articles that they point to, and I stick them in my book. And I read and I highlight them. And without reading those articles, I definitely wouldn't have passed the exam. There are a lot of nuggets that come out of those articles that I'm sure are mentioned. But again, I'm a visual learner, so I'm busy reading the slides and not listening as much to the instructor. I took the practice test several times, and I made notes on, like, when a question came up and I would look at it and think, I have no idea what that answer is. I'd write down the terms that I wasn't familiar with, and I'd go search for them. And I would say, I think I probably prepared about 6 hours to take the exam is my idea, although I didn't time it. And I think overall, as long as I wasn't holding myself accountable to getting 100%, I felt pretty well prepared with that time.
Cool.
What about you? What did you think of it?
So I've taken, this is like my third SAFE test, like you, so a third SAFE class in the last 12 months. I did not think it was nearly as difficult as the LPM course. I thought that test was just absolutely brutal. But I did the same thing. I took it about 10 days after when I had some free time. I did some readings. I did 2 runs of the practice test, and I passed it. Not as difficult as LPM. I am curious to see, and I know you and I both are going to inevitably sit through our SPC in the next 6 to 9 months. I'm curious to see how it stacks up, being as we've taken almost every course that SAFE offers. I'm curious to see where the SPC exam stacks up, but I thought it was good. Not terribly difficult, but like you said, you need to be familiar with the material. Those one-off links to articles really do hold some water. Yeah, they do. I will say I also took another SAFE class recently. They just timing-wise ended up being within the same month, and I live 20 minutes from Scaled Agile, so I get to do training without travel, which is lovely. Costs more though. But I took the Agile Solution and Product Management class, and I haven't yet taken that exam, and it's really hard. So now I have another one to compare it to in terms of, I think the RTE is right in the middle there. Well, when you finish that exam, Lynn, we'll have you back on. We'll do another episode. We can talk about that course. Oh, and that's one to invite Wendy to, our instructor for the RTE, because she was in that class with me. Yeah. Perfect. She's got some opinions on it. So last question, and I'm going to go around the horn to everybody, and I'm going to start with you again, Lynn. So do you think the course is worthwhile? And if so, who would you suggest taking? Yes, I absolutely think it's worthwhile. I think the people who should take it are definitely anybody who's sitting in the RTE role and doesn't feel completely confident in that role. I think the class does a really good job of packaging and speaking directly to that role, because as was mentioned at the beginning of the
podcast, this is sort of like the junk drawer of roles, and that there's a lot that the RTE is responsible for. So I think this class really helps the RTE understand scope and boundaries of their role and where they need to partner with other people. It was occurring to me during this class several times that if the product manager and system engineer would take the class, like if that triad took the classes related to each of their peers, they would be a really powerful triad. They would really be able to handle the needs of that triad in a much better way than trying to draw lines between their roles by, I take this class, you take that class. So it occurred to me, if you have the opportunity, it'd be good to broaden the audience.
That's interesting. That's hopefully someone from SAFE hears that, Lynn, because it really is an interesting idea. You understand what I do, but what you do and what we're all supposed to do. I think that really would be powerful. A lot like how some of the other training providers do bucketed courses where they put the relevant together.
Yep.
Troy, how about you? What is the course worthwhile, and who do you think should take it?
I think new RTEs should take it. I think it would be very beneficial for them. And going back to what you just said, I love that idea, actually, Lynn. I think it would be cool to have a SAFE boot camp, kind of like the ACI boot camp, where the boot camp is that triad role, and it's like 5 days, and you learn about all 3 roles, and it's like intensive.
Yeah,
that would be really cool.
Yeah,
I think that would be very effective.
I think that would too.
So. Yeah, so someone out there at Scaled Agile, Lynn gets some kind of credit if you do that.
They can buy me a drink next time I see him at a bar when we're not all in lockdown.
Did Lynn quit? Yeah, her SAFE residuals were paying out. It was worthwhile for her to quit. Leff, how about you? What are your thoughts? Who should take it? Worthwhile?
So I think anyone that's either a Scrum Master or looking to broaden their role as a Scrum Master, should take the RTE course. Anyone that's in the position should certainly take it. And, to pile on the Scrum of what a great idea, Lynn. I've actually run an experiment around that idea, having sent people through all levels of SAFE training, and then at the client, one of the clients that I've worked at, implementing triad coaching. So literally through a program increment, going through that training over the 10 weeks that we were in a PI, and really focusing on, let's just say, the program level triad, and really getting that 3-headed monster clicking. So I think there's there's a lot of validity to what you're suggesting. And I think we set the tone by training, and then the next piece is, this is how we're going to practice, and these are all the times that we're going to practice and continue to build that muscle. So I think
that's a great idea. And the new with Scaled Agile opening up the training now to be remote, there might be some opportunities to do that aren't quite as logistically difficult with travel.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, Lynn. We have crossed the Rubicon in that regard.
Okay.
And I think we're just about time. So on behalf of Troy, Drew, and myself, Lynn, I really want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us. On behalf of Lynn, myself, Troy, and Leff, I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in once again. The typical blah, 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 blah. If you enjoyed the episode, give us a review, a rating, some feedback, comments, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Prodbose, Podhamster, whatever. You can find us on the coalition.agileuprising.com. You can find us in our Discord server. We're all over Twitter. We're looking for more conversation. If you enjoyed the episode, if you didn't enjoy the episode, please reach out and let us know. If you have ideas for another episode, please reach out, let us know. We'll have you host the darn thing. So once again, on behalf of Lynn, Troy, Drew, and myself, I want to thank all of you for listening. And this is the Agile Uprising Podcast, signing out. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Hrcsko. Joined with me is our couple beers later, Chris Merman.
IR
here, and Say Do, and Andrew Leff.
Are here, present. Midnight.
All
Tired
right.
evening.
So the topic of this episode, we're going to do a quasi book report / readout. So the book that we were talking about is Jeffrey A. Moore's Zone to Win. So we're going to talk a little bit about the theory. We're going to talk about the idea and the concept of zone management. And then I want to bounce some of these ideas off both Leff and Merman about where they can see this being helpful, where they've seen this maybe used inadvertently before in a previous customer, and just to have a general discussion on the content itself. So let's start off, gents. So again, this book is written by Jeffrey A. Moore. He also wrote the book Crossing the Chasm. Why Ideas Succeed, I think, was another book, all that sort of stuff. And the concept behind this book is basically, it's based on conjunctive waves. So if anybody's read Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital by Carlotta Perez, she talks about this. Mick Kirsten references it a lot in the Project to Product book. It's the idea of all advancement comes in waves. And there are, your wave starts out at the bottom. It's not a big thing. It goes through an eruption, a frenzy. It reaches a turning point where it then becomes a synergy and then the majority, right? So this is where technology and ideas crest. And while one idea is cresting, you have the next big thing coming up behind it. So think about how the Industrial Revolution, mechanization was the big thing. And then we had petroleum-based industry. That was the next big thing. And now we have IT. That's the next big thing. So if all these waves are consistently happening, the idea behind Zone to Win is your company is either going to be on the ascent of a wave or trying to catch the next one, or about to be blown over by a wave that's coming. So how do you organize your organization, your enterprise, in a way that makes you think about these sort of things in relation to how you treat your programs and how you actually do your investment, your capital expenditures? What buckets do you put them in? Along the lines of the conjunctive waves, we've all heard of the McKinsey 3 growth horizons. It's a big part of the SAFe training. Lean enterprise, the book talks about it, where Horizon 1 is extending and defending your core. Horizon 2 is you're building your emerging business. And then Horizon 3 is your growth options, right? So we say these things, and every MBA is taught these things. But I'm going to ask you, Merman, have you ever been with a customer or a client where they've actually talked about these things and actually do them, the idea of the 3 horizons? And I ask you because I know it's part of SAFe. Have you ever heard someone say, no, we're going to put more money in Zone 2, and we're going to not worry so much about Zone 3 right now? Have you ever heard that?
To hear a client or a teammate speak about it, they will have needed to pay attention during training when they were taught this the very first time. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. How about you, Leff? Have you ever heard this? Like, again, we're taught it. Does it ever come up?
No.
Well, so much more succinct than myself. So here's the thing, though. I do want to point out the waves thing. I do feel like that waves are used to describe many things, right? So, like, for example, I've heard, waves of Agile even being used, right? Like, we're in the second wave, the third wave, we're in the, whatever wave that we're in. And, there's certain waves of mobile technology I've heard referred to, right? And, same thing with like AI. And so I do feel like that people know the wave concept. I don't feel like they truly understand, and I'm gonna put myself in that same category. Like, everything you just explained, I get. I mean, I grok. I just don't know how to always put it into practice, per se. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair. And that's fair. And I think that's one of the reasons that I thought this book was so interesting, was because we do hear those 3 waves. And it's like, well, okay, well, how do I allocate money? How do I think about that at the enterprise, especially when it's, large companies doing massive $1 million allocations in a budgetary cycle? How do I figure out that sort of stuff?
I also think that the struggle there is that requires organizations to have a single solitary budget and a single consolidated view of their budget. And depending on the org, I mean, most Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 100 companies, they're companies of companies, right? I mean, I've been at almost every single client I've been at in the last 4 or 5 years. they're companies of companies together. Well, they've got their own budgets, and so how are they supposed to have the the wave quadranted view of their money if they don't have a single solitary place they keep all their quarters? You know what I mean?
That's a good point. The realities of different clarity codes and budget buckets smack you in the face real quickly.
Yeah, but they don't even have the conversation. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's proposed back to them that they need to lean out their organization, and that is where they need to start. And gosh, it's every freaking client. It's like Game of Thrones. It literally is everyone runs their own kingdom. Kingdom is trying to kill the other kingdom off. But we all are branded by the same organization, and we're supposed to abide by the same core values that the company has instilled in us. So it's all, I just think it's flawed from the start.
I think you may be right. I think there's some basic behavioral underpinnings that we need to get out in front of people to make them start thinking that, hey, this is what you need to start thinking about, and this is how you should start thinking about it.
Yeah, and Jay, I have like a little bit of a sidebar question. Since you read the book in detail, something that just jumped out at me when you were talking about offense and defense, and you let me know how this resonates with you, and Chris, you can jump in too. Do you feel that when we put those words in front of companies, it creates competition within? And we see that a lot, and I'll put it in reference, right? Business versus IT, or IT versus the business, right? So when we put things in offense and defense, does that create, we were all raised to be competitive, right? To beat, to win. So does that create that we need to win mentality, or did it not resonate in the book?
So I think you are 100% spot on when it comes to the behavioral observation, right? Because this is the words we use matter, and it sets a semantic tone. However, in the book, and I'm going to go into it in detail, the way the book approaches it is either your entire company is on offense or your entire company is on defense. It's not broken out by departments. The point being, and the examples that were used in the book is a company that's on offense is Salesforce, right? And when I talk through the zones, it'll make more sense. Salesforce is a market leader. They are consistently innovating. They're always at the top of their game. They're always coming out with new things, right, wrong, or indifferent. So they're considered the offense client. The defense client is Microsoft. And in the book, they go through some example. When I talk through the zones, it'll make more sense how Microsoft is basically fighting. They've been fighting on their heels for a long time. First, it was Netscape. Then now it's Google Docs. It's Maps. It's Chrome OS. It's all that sort of stuff. So
I guess I would say more of the defense. I feel like, so your example of Microsoft right there, right? That's more of they're trying to, they're riding a wave of inertia, right? They have, X number of new machines, PCs created every year. Every single one of them has Windows loaded on it. Every single one of them has Microsoft Office loaded on it. There's Office 3, like Office 365 is the way that we know to do things. So I guess I'm hearing defense in maybe some other terms in my head. And like I said, as we go through the conversation, I think that maybe it'll play out in my head more. I don't think that all of Salesforce is on offense. And I think back to
that was
Leff's
just the example he used.
I totally understand. But what I'm saying is that in this business versus IT world, right? Is it possible for a telecommunications company saying we're going to own 5G? We're going to be first to 5G. We're going to be on offense because we want to. That's an example of offense. Yeah. We want to. Yes. However, having worked with almost all of those clients before in years past, they are. There's a large portion of that company that is actively playing defense because telecommunications companies were built on what? Landline business.
Right. So hold that thought, Merman. We're going to touch that. We're going to touch that. They do. Okay. There is a giant chunk in the book about cannibalization. So we're going to talk about it. So the best way to sum up offense, defense before we go into the detail is offense is you're riding the wave as it's going up. You're hitting it right as it's cresting. Defense is you're at the bottom and you're about to be consumed by the wave. So what do you do if you're in each instance? So I'll talk through the idea. So the concept is it's a typical consultant 4-box. And I want to talk through it from the upper right-hand corner, work my way clockwise. So the upper right-hand corner is sustaining innovation for revenue performance. This is your performance zone. So to put it in business speak, this is your top line, right? This is us hitting the targets that we committed to as a company. We are responsible for sustaining the revenue performance. So this is growth, this is sales, this is all that sort of stuff, right? So this is Horizon 1, back to McKinsey. That's the performance zone. In the bottom right-hand corner is, again, Horizon 1. This is your sustaining innovation. However, now you're also enabling investment. So what this is called the productivity zone. So while the performance zone is worried about your top line, your productivity zone is worried about your bottom line. So think compliance, think efficiency, think effectiveness. This is your BAU lights on, doors open type of activity. This is you're running the company. You're as efficient and as Leff used the term leaning out. You're as leaned out as you possibly can. And we're going to come back to that whole concept of leaned out. In the bottom left-hand corner, this is your disruptive innovation. Now we're getting into the disruptive innovation part, right? We've sustained on the right with performance and productivity. Now we're going to start disrupting. The bottom left-hand corner is zone 3, Horizon 3. This is your incubation zone. And this is where you're focusing on emerging markets, emerging categories, new products that are either tangential or currently in your wheelhouse. And this is where you position your enterprise to catch the next wave, not be subsumed. From the incubation zone, you go up to, again, you're staying in disruptive innovation, but now you're looking at revenue performance. This is where we make our bread and butter inadvertently. This is the transformation zone. So this is really scaling a disruptive business model to material size. That's straight from the book. Now think about what we all do with Agile transformations. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to scale, like, back to our last episode, Troy, when you scale garbage, you get a landfill. We're focusing on scaling the disruptive business model to material size. And in the book, there's a whole bunch of parts about finances. Material size is defined as greater than 10% of your gross profit. So there's over 10%. It's a big chunk, right? So we've talked about the performance piece. We've talked about the productivity piece, which you're sustaining your business top and bottom line. Then we've talked about the incubation zone and then the transformation zone, which is all your disruptive pieces. All four of these are tied together in a concept of zone management. And zone management ties to what we were just talking about, which is offense and defense. So we're going to use the offense example, right? Salesforce is the one in the book. So offense is defined as manage the resource allocation when you're on offense. Let me restart. When you're on offense, you're managing the resource allocation challenges of onboarding a new line of business while maintaining commitments to existing ones. Again, this is where we coaches, transformations, we make our bread and butter, right? How do we maintain on offense? So the way it's looked at in the book is when they present the idea of offense, now you have to look at it in all four parts of your business: the performance part, the productivity part, the incubation, the transformation. So when it comes to top line and the performance part, when you're on offense, the goal for that zone, the top line zone, is to scale the initiative out of the transformation zone within 3 years. And the business and IT, right? The entire organization acknowledged that completing this transformation, introducing this new disruptive model, is priority 1. Nothing else comes in behind it. It's what you got to do first. The bullet that he puts in here that I thought was really fascinating was more specifically calls out, do not try and balance your transformation with making your budget numbers. The transformation has to come first. Now, when I say that, Leff is nodding along. I know it's bad audio, and I can see Merman grinning. Leff, in your experience, when it comes to our transformations, how often do the companies try and balance these two and end up painting themselves into a corner?
Yeah, every time. It's funny. I have a coach colleague of mine, and she said this. She uses as a quote in her email signature: you can't rent a transformation. So it has to live on its own. It can't, it's hard. You make it really hard if you try and tie it to a deliverable by a date, right? It's not something you deliver. So it's incremental, it's measured, you evaluate, you readjust. I mean, there's so many facets to it. But yes, I rarely see it. To me, it's where a lot of a lot of this dies is because people are like, I'm spending a lot of money and I'm not seeing the results I believe I should be getting by the time I said I would get them.
Yep. You have organizations that a lot of times where we come in is where business doesn't trust IT because they won't deliver when they say they will, and IT doesn't trust business because they keep changing their minds. They throw too much whip at them. They're not allowed to ever deliver because there's always a new fire to put out, kind of a thing. They've got 85 epics in progress at once, kind of a thing. Like they're so that distrust, right? And that's like back to Leff's point earlier about business and IT playing defense or offense and defense against each other, right? That's where these transformation metrics really struggle. I've seen many clients where they actually turn the transformation into a set of metrics to say what percentage of our organization is using Scrum, what percentage of our organization is using Safe, how many trains do we have in progress, what's our cumulative velocity, trend, what's our, how many defects versus, are we trending, kind of a thing. And they use that to justify whether the transformation is going well, when we all know that oftentimes those numbers have nothing to do with how well. In fact, the change curve often says your metrics will go down, your productivity will go down, because this is all weird and new, especially in the time of coronavirus, when all we're doing is saying to people, why are you expecting teams to load up on the same velocity?
Yeah.
People are working from their fucking living rooms while their kids are running around throwing darts at each other, kind of a thing, right? Or trying to homeschool. I've had to learn how to be a homeschool teacher while delivering strategic deliveries on transformation design, kind of a thing, like whatever, making it sound like more important. All I'm saying is that those numbers are often weapons against a transformation, and they don't aid it.
I want to come back to your kids' say-do ratio in a minute. So back to the performance zone. There's a thing he calls out in the book, which I think that we don't ever talk about, or we do, but it's not talked about enough. Utilizing the size of the enterprise to accelerate the transformation. And the point that he makes, that these big enterprise organizations, they have a lot of depth and breadth, but they have a economy of scale that you can help use to drive a successful transformation that we don't ever think about. We don't ever think about. We're too busy trying to descale or do something else, and we kind of get lost in the sauce. And that's one of the things I took away is, I never thought about it that way. So that was the performance zone, right? So you're on offense in the performance zone. So now let's go to the productivity zone. So remember, this is your bottom line: compliance, efficiency, effectiveness. When you're on offense in the productivity zone, the biggest thing you should do is concentrate on turning programs that you've delivered, transformation programs in the past, go from a program to a system. So by a system, it's centralized, it's standardized, it's optimized. It's all those pieces. It's basically a wash, rinse, repeat, lights on, doors open type activity. And
I feel like I'm reading Dean's slides.
Yeah, this stuff comes from everywhere. This stuff is not, I shouldn't say it comes from everywhere. This stuff is recreated in multiple places in different trainings. It's going to look really familiar. Another thing the Moore talks about in the productivity zone is, if the operations team, if you have to create things to deal with disruption in the short term, make sure it's short term, make sure it's simple, and it eventually goes away. It's not one of those Band-Aid fixes that sticks around forever.
Yeah, this makes sense because so as old school Agile coaches, right? A lot of times what we tell IT organizations is that the reason why we start with, putting a framework in place or a small little experiment of teams to try to put some transformation in place is if we can get a boost in productivity, right? If we can get a little more productive from our teams, a little more bottom line balance, right? Then they will be willing to move to, a lot of times companies are willing to say, well, what else you got? Oh, well, maybe let's talk about your HR practices. Let's talk about your financing. Let's talk about let's talk about your strategic initiative planning, kind of a thing. So this really lines up pretty perfectly with our approach as from a coaching perspective, because if you can get teams a little more productive, maybe getting that bottom line brought up, well, then they'll be willing to say like, well, what else you got? And that means that they're ripe for Horizon 2, right?
Right.
Okay.
So when we're coming at it, we've done performance and productivity, right? So you're optimizing all that sort of stuff. When you go to the incubation zone, and this is your Horizon 3 bleeding edge stuff, right? This is where we're coming up with the new things that we're going to catch the next wave. The first thing Moore suggests, which I think is brilliant, is you set them up as what he calls IOUs, which is independent operating units. And by that, he means you're basically creating a sub company inside your company. And his argument that he makes is, if Chris Merman is a sales guy and he only knows how to sell vodka, right? And we've come up with a new product that's gin, right? So now I'm asking Chris Merman, who makes his money selling vodka, who only knows vodka, to start selling gin. It's probably not going to be as effective. So what you want to do is the gin incubation idea, right, has its own salespeople, has its own HR people that understand the wants and needs of the teams that are involved, has its own accounting people, has its own all that sort of stuff. And I thought that was really brilliant because we don't ever look at our transformations that way, and we probably should. The other idea.
So Leff, sorry, if I can just, help clarify me, Leff, when you hear an independent operating unit, how does that resonate with like your client work when you're coming in to help with the transformation?
It's a silo.
So that's what I thought I heard, but I don't know that that's what he intended. Is that right, Jay?
No, it's not a silo. Think about it this way. The key to differentiate between a silo inside a company and an independent operating unit is, imagine as if we took let's just use the Agile Uprising. We took the Agile Uprising, right? And that's our product. And let's say we had marketing and we had sales and we had accounting, we had finance, we had all this crazy shit that goes with it, right? We want to spin off a new idea, right? A totally new product in a new market. What we'd want to do is all that back office type stuff that we have for our main product, the Agile Uprising. We want to also have in the Agile Uprising 2, sales, finance, accounting, HR, legal, all that sort of stuff. So not just all the shared service stuff that we think silo and then they're a shared service. You want to basically create a business inside your business that runs this thing.
Got it.
And you want to have sales guys that know how to sell Agile Uprising. So you want HR people and accounting people that understand that thing in particular.
Yeah. So if using the telecommunications company metaphor that I used earlier, right? There's your folks that know landlines and fiber, and they know how to lay fiber. They know how to sell fiber. Right, they know how to. They know everything about putting something in the ground that helps people talk to each other. Then there's the wireless folks. Hey, I know how networks are. I know networks should be set up. I know how to work with local governments. I know how to do that. And those are cross-functional groups, business groups that have some business and IT that own different aspects of the business. Am I following?
Mm-hmm.
And Jay, one thing I would say, and Chris too, as we move into, I don't know if this fits into this quadrant or zone or whatever, the practice of refinement. So to me, when it comes in as an idea, the practice of refinement and having individuals be able to facilitate that, to go solicit all the areas that it needs to touch and continue to be open to build on that conversation, and having enough to know that we have just enough information to be able to say, we're now ready, right? This work is now in a state of ready. That to me creates that single operating unit, that focal point. When you have that practice in place and organizations are actually using it, abiding by it, and living it.
So there's a bullet in the incubation zone that talks about you concentrate on the solution that is relevant, powerful, and replicable, right? So that's prioritization right there. The offense part of it sounds to me like you're doing just enough, right, as to not overtax your people that you've made really productive and you're high performant, and yet you're still on the if you take the Google model and you bonus people based on failures, right? Like they used to, the famous stories of I got promoted based on failing at a project kind of a thing, right? Well, that's an organization that knows how to do that, right? The defense side of it is of incubation is we're gonna focus on all the things, because we're trying to incubate too much, because we're just going to throw everything against the wall and see if something sticks. The problem is that people get taxed beyond their means, and no real MVPs get out. They can't really test something in the market because they're always building.
And when we get to the next loop is the defense cycle. He actually talks about in the book, the worst thing you could do is take that approach where you're just throwing everything against the wall. Figure out what your biggest competitor is, neutralize them, and we're going to talk through that in a second. As all my shit falls over. So the next zone is the transformation zone, right? So this is, again, this you're scaling a disruptive business model of size. So when you think about this, what you want to do, and the suggestion from the book is, first of all, one transformation at a time. How many of us have broken that core tenet? The other offensive quote is, it's wholly owned and run by the CEO. So you're doing one transformation at a time. The CEO has the absolute, he has the conch, he has the spoon, he has the ability to run it. It's wholly owned and run by him. And it is established across the enterprise that transformation is the number one priority, and enterprise-wide. Merman, on all the things you've done, how many times have you seen one massive change program at a time? How many times have you seen it wholly owned and run by the CEO? And how many times have you seen transformation be the number one priority and everybody knows that that's all they have to concentrate on?
Well, I will say that to start with, there's no such thing as one transformation at a time. I mean, there's transforming the business, right? There's transforming delivery of the things that need to put that business, and to the point of, again, the theme of this podcast is business and IT are not friends, right? No matter how much they say they are, they're not friends, right? Oh, we need to transform how we deliver things to our customers. Yeah, well, we're going to transform the way we deliver code that business is asking for because we need to get better. Well, why are those two transformations seen as separate? Like, why can't we, or, hey, we need to change the way that we architect our work because we need to make it less costly, right? Our operating costs are too high. Oh, but we can't really focus on re-architecting our work right now because a paying customer just walked in the door and we need to do something for them. And so 3 years into transforming our operating costs from down, we're still at square one because I know a client that they're 3 years into trying to prove the MVP of transforming the way that they network their business because they can't seem to actually work on it because they've got paying business that walks through the door. And they're like, oh, well, we'll do that. Well, no, you're not going to ever do anything. You're never going to deliver anything. I will say that the CEO owning something, there are companies where CEOs do own stuff. Unfortunately, I don't get to work with companies that small anymore.
Right.
I don't even meet the C-suite. I barely even meet some SVPs. You know what I mean? So
right. And maybe that's part of the problem. Right? Like, think about in these organizations where you have 8,000, you know what it's like to be burned out through change. Right? You know what it's like. You know what it's like to have too much shit going on at the same time. Your mental capacity, your organizational elasticity, it's shot. So maybe this is one of the things we should start thinking about. Have just the transformation be priority one for the company. Because again, if you're making it priority one, you're not worried about making your number. You're using your economies of scale and you're getting it done within 3 years. One of the biggest complaints I've seen in all my transformations is people get burnt out because things are always changing. So why should I care?
Yes. Well, yeah, there is a pain factor to change. Like, you can change too much to where, if you scale transformation to the size that you want, let's just say you're only doing one transformation at a time, right? You can scale the transformation so much to the point where one little tweak to the engine and people are like, again, we just got this far. To the point though of leaders really engaging in the process. I don't know that I'm right, but I personally believe that wherever level they're at, if they are empowered to lead their part of the organization, right? So let's say they're only a VP or an SVP, right? Well, they've got a sliver of the business, right, that they own. If they are truly empowered to lead and run that business effectively, and they actually take the time to get engaged, and for those you that are SAFE people in the audience, that means they show up for leading SAFE class. They take the time to actually learn and engage. They show up for planning events. They deliver, they deliver addresses to the, and inspire the troops kind of a thing. They help take part in removing impediments, right? So if the leaders will actually do that, they don't need to be the CEO for it to be successful. I just don't often, I think to where you were headed though, Jay, is that they don't often do that. They show up, they maybe show up for, half a day of the 2-day training, or one of the days, the 2-day training. And then every now and then they come to a planning event, and they sort of listen in every now and then. But they're not really interested in taking the time to invest in taking a part in it. And I think that's where this zone really hurts, is when the leadership, because that's the whole point of SAFE, right? SAFE says leadership is the foundation of everything. If you're not going to get in, what are you doing this for?
And maybe we just stumbled into the missing link. I don't know. We're just, hypothesizing here, but maybe that's part of the whole problem whatsoever. So now, Mervin, we're going to talk about when a company goes on defense. So when a company's on defense, they're trying to beat back a disruptive innovator. So I'm going to try and use, it's not in the book. In the book, they use Microsoft as the example. I'm going to try and use your example of a large telco that has a landline contingent, and now here comes 5G, right? So this is the new product. So in the event that I'm at, say, Ma Bell, right, which is a company that's no longer around, I'm at Ma Bell and I sell landlines, and another part of Ma Bell is coming up with 5G wireless speeds. Based upon what we just talked about in the book, that would be offense, where coming out of the incubation zone, it moves to transformation. The CEO comes out and says, I'm going to own this. We're doing 5G. I know we're going to cannibalize our landlines, but with our economies of scale, with our pre-existing customer base, we can make it work, right? That's one example. Let's do the other example of, we're at Ma Bell, we sell landlines, and here comes Chris Merman Technologies, who's doing 5G, right? And we're totally like behind the 8 ball now. Now we're on defense because we're behind the wave. So
yeah. The more realistic is like, so say for example, they used to put copper in the ground, right, to run landlines. Yeah, because they used to have lines going over, right, and then they started running lines under. Right, started running copper underneath the ground. Well, here comes dark fiber, right, and so the offense part of it is, hey, we're going to turn our landline pipes from copper to fiber, and we'll lean into this VoIP thing. So instead of just doing phone to phone, sort of old school, plug the things in. We're actually going to make this VoIP thing a reality. Everybody's going to have VoIP. You can have fiber for voice. You can have fiber for internet. You can have fiber for, cable or whatever, right? Like if you're delivering content, that's a good piece of it. I've worked in telco way too.
Yeah, you have. You've known way too much. I mean, This is a bad B movie, action movie.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Shame. So let's talk about, so if we're on defense, right? The other companies come out and threaten our business model. In the book, he uses examples like Kodak, like Nokia, companies that were at the top of their game and had the world by their hands. And
MySpace.
They saw this disruptive thing coming. Well, I don't know if I'd compare MySpace to Tom. He's still a millionaire no matter what he says.
It's a joke.
But think about it though, right? Kodak invented the digital picture, and then they basically sat on it until it ate them. Nokia saw Apple coming, and it ate them. So when you're on defense, start with the transformation zone, right? So somebody's come out and they're threatening your business model. The first hint he gives is concentrate on evolution, not revolution. You don't want to reinvent your whole company. You want to evolve to meet what the other competitor is offering. And the 3 tenets he uses for that is neutralize, optimize, and differentiate. So the first thing is neutralize. You do that by offering the same thing your competitor offers, right? That's how you neutralize it. Optimize, he says flat out, you're a big enough company, you undercut them on price. You undercut the customer on the competitor on price. They can't compete.
the Amazon, the AWS
Yep.
model, you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
like there's no way that I don't even know if they're still a thing, but there's no way Rackspace can compete on price, because every time they reduce their prices, Amazon goes, oh, okay, you want to play that game?
Exactly. Use your corporate scale and get your bet and your benefit.
Win.
Yep. So at that point, you've neutralized and you've optimized. Now you can differentiate. Now you can say, okay, well, Chris Merman Inc. offers this. Ma Bell is going to offer this. So while that's going on in the transformation zone, what is the performance zone doing? Again, you're focusing on neutralization, not differentiation. All your R&D stuff should be spent on neutralizing the threat. The other thing they talk about is you should, at that point, if your company is in a state of existential crisis, you should be able to appropriate assets from the incubation zone. All those IOUs that we talked about, they should be giving up whoever they need to give up in order to make sure they can beat off the threat, because it's an existential thing, right? So it'd be like your example of Ma Bell internals. The 5G guys are fighting with the landline guys, and then here comes like super satellite brain-to-brain ESP technology, right? Like we can't fight with each other. We have a bigger problem at the front gate.
Yep.
The productivity piece. So this is where we're running the engine. When we're under attack, when we're in the defense mode, the productivity piece, they need to do whatever is possible to optimize their current operations. So what they need to do is he calls it the 6 levers, which ties to Lean and Six Sigma. You want to centralize, standardize, modularize, optimize, instrument, and outsource, right? So this is all the things about making your stuff. We talked about turning programs into systems. You want to make your systems repeatable, compartmentalized boxes. So once I can outsource that, or once I have it running as lean as possible, all those extra people that were doing care and feeding can go fight off this disruptor that's at the gate.
And I think that most companies, that's where they really struggle, is this, hey, I gotta get lean and mean in my productivity. Because the longer the company's been around, the more legacy systems they have, the larger the number of legacy systems they have. And as everybody knows that works for a large company, you don't sunset applications. You make another version of the same application and you keep both of them running, because God forbid lightning strikes, and we don't want to sunset anything. And certainly we don't want anything to, and if you're going to modularize things and you're going to certainly like move to the cloud per se, right? Slim down your architecture, so to speak. That requires development leaders and development managers who have owned that application and owned that little fiefdom that they've created around their system or an application or set of applications, right? It requires them to be willing to give up control, for them to go learn a new application or system and give up all the people and all the things that they have, right? That's where companies really, really, really struggle, because if you're not willing to lean into that, say, I don't care if you love this application and that's all you know. It's time for you all to learn a new application, because that one's going bye-bye.
And it's funny you mentioned the concept of sunsetting, because in the book, he specifically talks about how ideally what your company should do is you create a team of people, and it is their sole job just to sunset applications. So we're getting rid of PeopleSoft, right? We're moving to Workday or whatever. You and I, Merman, we're on the sunset team. So we get this asset. It's already been optimized to within an inch of its life. We know how to gracefully help this thing exit. And we know that once we sunset one thing, there's another one coming right behind it, which in a true mature org, that's what we should see.
It's not you, it's me. And by that, I mean, it is you.
Exactly. So
you have some companies that spend at least 50% of their operational spend on just upkeep in systems, right? Everybody in the audience that's listening, that's you. Raise your hand, right? Like the amount of defense that we play against optimizing our architecture from scratch, and God forbid, don't throw domain-driven design at me, because none of you, I barely know what it is. So, and architects, don't act like you know what it is, because if you did, you would slash half of your systems and just throw it away in the dumpster. don't say that you want to do this and then don't do anything about it, because all you're doing is playing defense just like everybody else is. And I get it. Nobody wants to be out of a job, especially right now. Nobody wants to be out of a job.
Right.
Right. But the truly emergent, transformative companies use those as an opportunity to evolve and grow. And that's probably where you're headed, Jay, is that if we can truly seize upon this and go, hey, we're not going to lose our jobs. Actually, we're going to pivot. We're going to move here. And this is actually going to save us money. And we're going to be awesome because we'll get invited to all the cool tech conferences because we're, making some awesome shit.
So that, Merman, your whole idea of companies spending a large amount of their available capital on just upkeep, care, and feeding of applications that are long since their sell-by date, that ties to Peter Maurer from Xscale talks about throughput accounting. Even SAFE in the LPM course talks about participatory budgeting, where the first thing you set aside when you do budgeting is your run operations, not grow or transform. And if a company would even try this, you and I could be sitting there and going, hey, Merman, we're supposed to have like 10 million to divvy up this quarter, and we're spending 8 on just running the engine. What the fuck are we doing here? Like, what's going on? How do we optimize this? And that simple idea, it sounds simple in theory. I know I'm making it sound easy. That would open up the Pandora's box if everybody's looking at it saying $100 million a year. We're spending $60 million on care and feeding of old applications that don't scale the way we want. This is an uncomfortable point.
Yeah, let me ask you this question. Do you feel like that this is where the CapEx versus OpEx argument sometimes comes into play? Because I know that sometimes the care and feeding is viewed as operational, and not because you can't capitalize on that always. And of course, IT orgs have way more capital budget than they do operational budget. But I feel like sometimes organizations hide that care and feeding under the operational budget, and then they go, "Well, that's not mine to worry about anyways. I'm only going to worry about the capital stuff." And I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble.
I think you're right, and I'm going to make a bold statement here. I think as IT practitioners, unless you are in finance, you should not be thinking 1 second around CapEx versus OpEx. And here's why I'm going to say that. When I took my SAFE LPM course, right, the director of finance for technology was in the room, and he was taking the course with us, which was great. A very talkative, friendly guy. And when we got to this point of CapEx versus OpEx, someone raised their hand, because it's taught in the SAFE course. And
Sure.
Someone raised their hand and they said, I get emails from people where they're asking, what clarity code do I use for this? Because they want to know if it's CapEx or OpEx. And not only was the director of finance IT in there, one of his directs was in there. And the woman turned to this other person and said, I would ask them why they care. And we all sort of just stopped like, oh, did you just say the emperor has no clothes? And the finance director even said, look, we are at the point now where we're funding teams. We're not funding projects. We're not funding programs. The CapEx, OpEx thing is my problem, not yours. You need to worry about delivering value. And you want to talk about like a record scratch. The whole room sort of stopped and looked at each other. Because then the question, after we stopped and looked at each other, we all sort of like blinked a couple times. The next remark is, okay, well, you're saying this and you're in this class and we get it. Where is the breakdown? How is that message not coming down off the mountain and getting to the bottom? And we had a couple of really honest conversations where people started to realize that there are certain parts of the managerial tier, right, where that message was either getting to them and they were ignoring it, or it wasn't even getting to them at all. And that's the problem we were running into. So that's, that whole CapEx, OpEx monster. I have very strong opinions on that. I don't think we should ever be worried about that. We should worry about delivering value, and the rest comes out the end.
Yeah, in a perfect world.
Yeah. In a perfect world, I'd also still have my hair and be able to see my feet when I stand straight up. So taking this one home, Merman, we're going to talk about the incubation zone. That's the last piece in defense. And really, at this point, all your IOUs go, they get paused. You're giving up as many people as you can in order to make sure we're not put out of business. The whole neutralization, optimize, differentiate. You're not really worried about the incubation zone pieces. But to your point, right, you talked about earlier on, we talked about ego and people who build their empire. They don't want to give the pieces up. he talks about in the incubation zone, you want the people running these things to have confidence to understand that if you and I are working on a pet project and there's an existential threat and that pet IOU goes away, that independent operating unit, we can't take it personally. It's the company's at stake and we need to move on.
No.
And that takes a leader that is very, very secure and confident in their abilities. And I don't know if we see that in a lot of companies.
Well, also it means that you need to pay and bonus your people differently, because I remember some time ago, I was working with a bunch of IT leaders on a workshop of, okay, we've launched this many trains. Where do we want to launch the next stuff? And we talked about, here's what we've learned so far. Here's where you've struggled. Here's what you're doing well. Here's where we're struggling in our launches. And these are the things we'd like you all to address before we launch the next set of things. And I had an IT manager, like a senior manager, stand up, or a director, stand up and say, I get that you want to focus on things like automation, test automation, and cross-functional teams, co-located teams. I'm not paid on creating cross-functional teams, and I'm not paid on creating development pipelines. I'm paid on delivering as much code as fast as humanly possible. And when you want to change how, and he pointed to his boss, and when you change how he bonuses me, then I'll have a conversation about that. And the whole room was like,
So
okay.
I have one final question for you, Merman, and then we're going to wrap this one up. Would you, based upon that statement, would you say 99% of the problems, roadblocks, impediments that we run into being successful with our transformation comes to impediments that are not, it comes to people not incentivized towards the goals we want to achieve?
Yes, I'll give a slightly nuanced answer to that. I think that their incentives are not always the same, right? So for example, the business person, they're probably bonused by the number of client outages that they have, or the number of sales that they have, or the number of tickets that are created or avoided, kind of a thing. Whereas the IT person, they're bonused by things like how many features did you deliver, or how many projects were kept on time, or and they're not incentivized the same, right? So if we truly, I think in my mind, the transformation zone, one transformation at a time, means everybody is paid the same way based upon our success, right? If we are truly going to organize our transformations, then everybody needs to be incentivized equally by our outcome. And until we do that, you're not going to get the results you want.
No, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and that's a great way to take us out. So Merman, I want to thank you for taking your time to walk through this with me. I know you hadn't read the book, so I hope it was beneficial. On behalf,
I want to read it now.
It's a good read, and I'll put a link in the show notes. It's not a long one either. So on behalf of Chris and myself, I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in again. Did you read the book, listeners out there? Do you have thoughts? Did we get it right? Did I get it wrong? Jeffrey A. Moore, if you're out there and listening and you want to come on to talk about what I took out of the book, please, we would love to have you on. If somebody knows Mr. Moore, wants to get him on, have him on too. Join a discussion on the coalition. Join a discussion in Discord. We have a very raucous Discord server, a lot of people chatting. We appreciate all you listeners. So once again, on behalf of Merman and myself, I want to thank all of you. And this is the Agile Uprising Podcast signing out. Wash your hands.
Stay safe, everybody.
Wash your hands.